The tone this morning wasn't casual, and if you've been around this game long enough, you know when a conversation crosses that line from entertainment into something that actually feels real. That's exactly what happened when the discussion shifted toward the Lakers and the possibility of bringing in a piece that could quietly change everything about how this team looks when the games start to matter most. It started with what we've been seeing on the floor lately. This version of the Lakers is not the same group people were questioning earlier in the season. There's structure now. There's clarity in roles. You're watching an offense that understands itself, where Luka controls the tempo, Reeves reads the second layer of the defense, and LeBron has leaned into something that, honestly, only a player with his IQ could fully embrace at this stage. He's picking spots, creating advantages, and trusting others to finish. That win over Indiana didn't feel random either. It felt like confirmation, the scoring balance, the rhythm, the way possessions had purpose instead of just movement for the sake of it. But even in a night where everything clicks offensively, there's still that underlying question that keeps coming back in conversations inside the league. What happens when the game slows down, when every possession is targeted, when the matchups become personal? That's where the name Aaron Gordon starts carrying weight. Not as noise, not as a fantasy scenario, but as a solution that people who understand roster construction are taking seriously. Because when you look at what this team already does well, the gap becomes easier to identify. It's not about scoring. It's not about needing another player to take shots away from your core. It's about resistance. It's about having someone who can step into the toughest defensive assignments and not just survive, but change how those matchups feel. And the more you think about it, the more it starts to make sense in a way that doesn't require forcing anything. Gordon doesn't need touches to impact the game. He doesn't need the offense to revolve around him to stay engaged. He fits into movement, into spacing, into moments that aren't scripted but still decide outcomes. With LeBron seeing everything before it happens, and Luka manipulating defenses possession after possession, having someone who knows exactly when to cut, when to crash, when to finish without hesitation, that's where this becomes dangerous. Comment purple and gold never fades if you know this franchise always comes back into the fight. What really stands out is how this wouldn't disrupt what's already working. That matters more than people think. You don't want to fix one issue and create another. And that's why internally, the idea of adding a player who enhances identity instead of reshaping it is gaining traction. Gordon brings physicality without demanding control. He brings energy without needing volume. And in a system that's starting to rely more on reads than calls, that kind of presence becomes even more valuable. There's also the defensive side that keeps getting brought up in serious conversations. When you start projecting playoff scenarios, when you think about the type of players you're going to have to deal with over a 7-game series, it becomes clear why this isn't just a luxury move. It's about having options. It's about not being forced into mismatches that tilt games before they even settle in. Gordon gives you flexibility, and in the postseason, flexibility is often the difference between control and chaos. And then there's the part that doesn't show up in box scores. Experience. Not just being in the playoffs, but understanding what it feels like when every possession carries weight. The Lakers already have leadership, but adding another voice that's been through that environment, that's responded under pressure, that reinforces standards inside the locker room, that's something front offices don't ignore when they believe they're close. The sense around all of this is not desperation, it's calculation. It's recognizing that the foundation is already there, that this isn't about chasing something unrealistic, but about tightening the details that separate a strong team from one that can actually impose itself when the lights are brightest. Right, championship standard, if you believe the Lakers should always be chasing the top. And here's where it starts to get even more interesting, because the conversations aren't happening in isolation. There's a broader vision being discussed, one that involves not just improving one area, but reinforcing multiple layers of this roster at the same time. The idea of pairing interior presence with wing defense, of building a group that can adjust depending on the matchup, instead of being forced into one identity. That's the kind of thinking that usually leads to something bigger. What people around the league are watching now isn't just whether the Lakers make a move, but how far they're willing to go to make sure this version of the team doesn't fall short when the expectations rise again. because once you get this close to something real, standing still is not an option. And there's a growing feeling that this story hasn't shown its full direction yet. That what's being discussed right now could be just the beginning of a sequence that reshapes how this team is viewed heading into the most important stretch of the season. Lakers Nation, subscribe right now because the next few weeks could bring some huge news for this franchise. Because when an organization like this starts evaluating moves with this level of precision, it usually means timelines are being taken seriously. There's an awareness that what's been built over the past stretch of games isn't something you gamble with lightly. You protect it, but at the same time, you recognize when it needs reinforcement before the pressure ramps up. What keeps coming up in these internal evaluations is how seamlessly a player like Gordon could elevate the parts of the game that don't always get headlines but decide outcomes in May and June. The extra possession from an offensive rebound, the defensive stop that forces a late clock shot, the rotation that prevents a clean look. Those are the details that shift momentum, and right now there's a belief that adding that layer could stabilize everything when the margin gets thin. There's also an understanding of how this would impact the current core without forcing adjustments that take players out of their comfort zones. Luka continues dictating pace, Reeves keeps finding those gaps defenses leave behind, and LeBron remains the connector that ties everything together. What changes is what happens around them. The floor becomes more balanced, the defensive assignments more defined, and the team starts to feel less reactive and more in control. Right, built for the bright lights, if you believe the Lakers respond when the spotlight is strongest. And here's where the urgency begins to quietly build. The Western standings are tight, positioning matters, and every move from this point forward carries weight beyond just the regular season. It's about entering that playoff environment without unanswered questions. The Lakers have answered some of them already, but not all. That's why this kind of discussion isn't fading away. It's gaining consistency. Another element that people around the situation keep pointing to is how this type of addition changes the emotional tone of the group. Not in a dramatic way, but in subtle confidence. When players know they have coverage behind them, when they trust that matchups won't expose weaknesses, the entire approach shifts. Execution becomes cleaner, decisions become sharper, and the team stops playing with hesitation. There's also something to be said about timing. Moves like this don't just happen because they make sense on paper. They happen because the front office believes the moment is right. And from everything being discussed, there's a growing sense that the Lakers are approaching that point where waiting no longer aligns with what they're seeing internally. If you've been following this channel closely, you already know we don't bring this kind of information unless there's something real developing behind the scenes. So if you want to stay ahead of these moves before they fully break, this is the moment to lock in. Hit subscribe right now, because what's unfolding here could shift fast, and the next update might come sooner than people expect. Comment, never count out the Lake Show. If you know this team is always one move away from changing everything. And the truth is, once a franchise like this starts leaning in a certain direction, it rarely stops halfway. The expectation inside the building isn't just to compete, it's to position this team in a way where it can dictate how series are played. That requires balance, presence, and players who understand their role without needing it explained. What's being lined up isn't about adding noise to the roster. It's about refining something that's already showing signs of being real. And when that process starts gaining momentum, it tends to lead to moments that redefine how the season is remembered. There's still more developing around this situation, and some of the details being discussed behind the scenes haven't fully surfaced yet. But the direction is becoming clearer, and if things continue moving the way they are right now, the next piece of this could carry even more weight than people are anticipating. What's starting to surface now goes beyond just fit on the court. There's a financial layer, a negotiation layer, and most importantly, a conviction layer inside the front office. Because making a move of this magnitude isn't just about liking a player, it's about being certain he's the missing piece when everything tightens up. And from what's being talked about, that level of belief is building. There's also a growing sense that the coaching staff is already thinking ahead, visualizing how rotations would look, how defensive assignments would shift, and how late-game lineups could finally have the balance they've been searching for. Not experimental, not reactive, but intentional. That's when you know this isn't just speculation floating around. It's something being seriously mapped out. Another point that keeps coming up in conversations is how this kind of addition impacts the identity of the team in high-pressure moments. Right now, the Lakers can score with anyone, but playoff basketball has a way of exposing details that don't show up over 82 games. Having a player who thrives in physical matchups, who embraces contact, who doesn't fade when possessions slow down, that changes how opponents approach you. Right? The banners tell the story. If you believe the history of this franchise still matters today. And internally, there's an awareness of what this moment represents. This isn't about building for years down the line. This is about maximizing what's already in place. The core has found something that works, something that feels sustainable, but the difference between being dangerous and being decisive often comes down to one move that sharpens everything else. There's also quiet confidence in how this team would evolve if that move happens. Transition opportunities become more threatening, defensive switches become cleaner, and the margin for error shrinks in the right direction. It's not about becoming perfect, it's about becoming harder to break down over the course of a series. If you've been paying attention, you can feel that this situation is moving from discussion into decision territory, and that's exactly why being early matters. If you want to stay informed before these updates hit everywhere else, make sure you're subscribed right now. Not later, not after it breaks, now. Because once things accelerate, you don't get time to catch up. Right? The Lake Show lives on. If you feel this franchise still has more to prove. And the reality is, moments like this define how a season is remembered, not just by wins and losses, but by whether the organization recognized what was in front of them and acted on it. The Lakers have never been a franchise that waits for opportunities to pass by, and everything right now suggests they understand exactly what's at stake. There are still moving parts behind the scenes, still conversations that haven't fully come to light, but the direction is becoming harder to ignore. And if this continues trending the way it is, the next development won't just add to the story. It could reshape how this entire run is viewed when it's all said and done. If you're a real Lakers fan and want to stay updated on everything happening with this team, subscribe now, because things could get interesting very soon. And there's one last detail that can't be overlooked here. When a team starts aligning talent, timing, and intent at the same moment, that's usually when things stop being theoretical and start becoming real. The Lakers are right on that edge, where one decision can lock in everything they've been building or leave questions hanging when it matters most. This isn't just about adding a name. It's about reinforcing a standard that's been carried for decades, about stepping into that expectation instead of circling around it. And if the move happens, it won't feel surprising to those who've been paying close attention. It'll feel inevitable. Comment, Los Angeles expects more. If you believe this team should never settle for less than contention. If you want to stay ahead of every move, every update, and every shift around this team, make sure you're subscribed now. This channel is where you'll get the full picture before the rest catches up. And the next chapter of this story is closer than it seems.